What becomes of a prayer when the one it was meant for begins to doubt its own eternity? The chronicle awakens, as if disturbed from a sepulchre of ash. Vox crypts hiss, parchment curls, and a question once forbidden claws its way back into memory. In the age where the Imperium measures time in extinction events, there are whispers that even saints may tire. Sister Celestine, the living saint, had burned across battlefields for centuries like a falling star that never struck the ground. Worlds rose in her wake. Heresy fled screaming before her blade. Yet this record does not begin with triumph, but with silence. A silence so deep it swallowed hymns whole. On the dead moon of Ithaca Prime, where cathedrals lay split like rib cages and oceans had boiled away, the Imperium would learn that faith, when stretched across 10,000 years, can begin to fray. The eternal war does not end heroes, it erodes them. Ash fell like snow upon the shattered basilicas of Ithaca Prime, each flake a fragment of something once holy. The enemy had no name that survived translation, only sigils that hurt to behold, and machines that screamed with stolen choirs. The Adepta Sororitas advanced through ruin, bolters roaring prayers older than the stars, yet it was Celestine who drew the fire. She descended as she always had, wreathed in auramite light, wings blazing, sword incandescent with the Emperor's promise. The faithful wept at the sight of her. Some fell to their knees mid-charge, undone by revelation. Yet as she struck, something faltered, not her blade, but the fire behind it. The enemy recoiled but did not break. Their weapons bit into her radiance, carving sparks from sanctity itself. For the first time in living memory, Celestine staggered, and the battlefield noticed. She rose again, of course, she always did. Resurrection was her sacrament, death her momentary inconvenience. Yet this rising was slower. Pain lingered longer. The wings of light that bore her aloft flickered like failing lumen globes in a forgotten shrine. Around her, sisters died singing, voices torn from throats by shrapnel and warp heat. Celestine cut through the foe with burning arcs of faith, but between each stroke came a whisper she could not silence. How many times had she fallen? How many times had she been reforged in the Emperor's image, pulled screaming from the immaterium back into flesh? The question gnawed as insistently as any demon. She had never asked it before. Saints were not meant to count the cost. Yet as the sky burned and the moon cracked, doubt slipped through the cracks in her armor like smoke. In the catacombs beneath the battlefield, ancient relic engines stirred, awakened by the resonance of her presence. These vaults predated the Imperium, carved by hands that had worshipped something else entirely. Celestine felt them calling, not with malice, but with recognition. As she fought, visions bled into her sight, echoes of past lives, past deaths, all folding over one another like broken mirrors. She saw herself rise on 100 worlds, crowned by flame, adored by billions who would never know her fear. She saw the Emperor upon his throne, distant, silent, a son locked behind walls of suffering. For the first time, she wondered if her resurrections were gifts, or obligations enforced by a will too vast to notice her unraveling. Her sword hesitated for a fraction of a heartbeat. That was enough. The enemy struck with something profane, a lance of void light that did not wound the body but peeled back the soul. Celestine screamed, a sound no mortal throat should make, and crashed into the ruins of a shattered reliquary. Stone saints collapsed around her like witnesses averting their gaze. The battlefield froze. Sororitas' lines faltered, faith wavered, and in that instant, the enemy surged. Celestine lay amid the wreckage, wings guttering, blood glowing as it soaked into dust that remembered older gods. She tried to rise and failed. The prayers of her sisters washed over her like distant thunder, but they could not drown out the truth pressing in. She felt the pull again. the familiar rending that heralded death and rebirth. Yet this time, something resisted. The Emperor's light did not seize her at once. For a heartbeat too long, she was alone. In that solitude, she heard another voice. Not the howling of the warp, not the Emperor's silent command, but something buried deep within herself. It asked no questions. It offered no absolution. It simply asked her to rest. The temptation was blasphemous yet unbearably gentle. She saw the Imperium as it truly was, an empire of monuments built atop graves, sustained by sacrifice it could never repay. How many had died believing in her? How many had screamed her name as salvation that never came? The thought cracked something sacred. When the killing blow fell, when the enemy's blade pierced her chest and extinguished her light, the world did not end. It merely went quiet, as though holding its breath. The Adepta Sororitas fought on in a frenzy of grief and fury, tearing the enemy apart molecule by molecule. They expected the miracle. They waited for the flare of resurrection, for the saint to rise radiant from death. Minutes passed, then hours. The battlefield grew cold. Celestine did not return. Panic spread like a contagion. Some whispered her name as a plea, others as a curse. A canoness ordered the body recovered, though it weighed more than any mortal form should, dense with lingering divinity. As they bore her to the extraction craft, her wings dimmed to embers, then to nothing at all. For the first time in 10 millennia, a living saint lay still. In orbit, the ecclesiarchy sealed the event beneath layers of classification and denial. Official records spoke of strategic withdrawal, of victory purchased at great cost. No mention was made of a fallen saint, yet rumors metastasized through the Imperium's veins. Pilgrims reported dreams of empty thrones and extinguished candles. Astropaths screamed themselves blind, babbling of a light gone missing in the warp's tapestry. The Emperor did not speak. He never did. But the silence felt heavier now, as though something expected had failed to arrive. On Terra, high lords argued behind sealed doors, debating whether faith could survive the absence of its brightest symbol. None dared voice the deeper fear that Celestine's return had not been delayed, but denied. Within the warp, currents shifted. Where Celestine's soul should have blazed like a beacon, there was only shadowed turbulence. Demons circled the absence cautiously, as predators do a fresh wound. Something had changed in the Imperium's balance, a note gone missing from an eternal scream. Some entities laughed, others recoiled. The Emperor's presence loomed as always, vast and incomprehensible, yet even he did not reach for her. Or could not. The possibility gnawed at the edges of reality. If a saint could fall beyond recall, what did that mean for the countless martyrs promised eternity in his name? The warp remembered her differently now, not as a weapon, but as a question. On Ithaca Prime, the ruins continued to crumble beneath radioactive storms. Celestine's blood had seeped deep into the moon's crust, mingling with relic engine cores and forgotten sigils. Machines whispered where they never had before. The dead did not rest easily. Explorator teams sent centuries later would report impossible readings, localized null zones intertwined with bursts of sanctified energy, as though two opposing truths were struggling to coexist. Some claimed to see a woman walking the ash wastes, unwinged, unarmed, leaving footprints that glowed briefly before fading. The reports were dismissed, then buried. Yet the moon was quietly quarantined, its name struck from star charts with unusual haste. Elsewhere, the Imperium adapted as it always did. New saints were elevated, new icons forged. The memory of Celestine was polished into something safer, her doubts scrubbed from murals and sermons alike. Children were taught she still watched over them, eternal and unbroken. But among the sororitas who had seen her fall, something curdled. Their prayers grew sharper, more desperate. Faith became less a comfort and more a blade clutched too tightly. They did not ask if Celestine would return. They asked what would happen if she chose not to. In the eternal war, even belief can fracture under strain. Far from human space, beyond sanctioned maps and sanctioned thought, a presence stirred where none should. A soul scarred by devotion, unclaimed by throne or warp, drifted through a realm without name. It remembered fire. It remembered obedience. It remembered being used as a symbol until the symbol eclipsed the self. For the first time, it considered choice. The eternal war raged on without pause, uncaring. But somewhere between damnation and divinity, something that had once been Sister Celestine hesitated, and in that hesitation fate itself seemed to crack, just enough for something else to begin watching. Silence followed her final breath. But it was not empty. It clung to the Imperium like incense trapped in a sealed chapel, thick with unspoken dread. Across 1,000 warfronts, warriors paused without knowing why, hands tightening on weapons, hearts stuttering as if a familiar hymn had ended mid-verse. In cloisters and trench lines alike, prayers faltered. The Emperor's name tasted different on the tongue. Somewhere deep within the labyrinthine archives of terror, a servo skull misfiled a chronicle by a fraction of a degree, and the machine spirit screamed. The Imperium did not yet know what it had lost, only that something foundational had shifted. Faith, once a roaring fire, had begun to smolder unevenly, casting strange shadows where none had been before. Among the Adeptus Auroritas, grief curdled into vigilance. Canonesses convened in sealed sanctums, their armor unadorned, their voices stripped of ceremony. They spoke of visions, of candles guttering beneath unseen winds, of wings shedding feathers that turned to ash before touching the ground. Younger sisters clung harder to doctrine, reciting litanies until their throats bled, while veterans stared too long at empty spaces where miracles used to happen. The question was never voiced aloud, but it echoed in every pause. If a living saint could fall and not rise, what did that say of the vows sworn in her name? Faith had always demanded sacrifice. Now it demanded certainty where none could be found. Priests of the Ministorum sensed opportunity in the fracture. On shrine worlds swollen with pilgrims, revised sermons spread like sanctioned viruses. Celestine's absence was reframed not as loss, but as ascension beyond comprehension. Murals were altered subtly, wings painted larger, her gaze turned skyward and away from the faithful. Doubt was declared a test, its expression a sin. Those who questioned too loudly vanished into oubliettes beneath cathedrals, their screams absorbed by holy stone. Yet even as dogma tightened its grip, cracks widened. Some confessors began to hear prayers not of devotion, but of accusation. The Emperor remained silent, and in that silence men learned to lie to preserve the sound of belief. On distant battlefields, Astra Militarum regiments reported anomalies. Commissars noted drops in morale that could not be corrected by execution alone. Soldiers spoke of dreams where saints turned their backs, of banners rotting from the inside. One regiment on the fringe world of Halrex burned its own chapel after a trooper claimed the statue of Celestine wept blood. The Inquisition erased the incident, but not before the rumor spread through astropathic murmurs. Where once her name had been invoked as a shield, now it was spoken cautiously, like a memory that hurt to touch. Faith had not vanished. It had become unstable, volatile, capable of turning inward without warning. Within the ecclesiarchy's highest echelons, political shadows lengthened. Cardinals maneuvered to control the narrative of sanctity, arguing over who had the authority to define sainthood when resurrection itself had failed. Some proposed elevating a new living saint, carefully cultivated and monitored, a miracle engineered rather than awaited. Others warned this was hubris bordering on apostasy. Behind locked doors, a faction whispered that Celestine's final failure proved a dangerous truth, that saints were not divine instruments, but mortal vessels stretched too thin by endless war. These whispers never reached the public, but they influenced policy, funding, and the quiet redirection of crusades. The Imperium's faith machine began to recalibrate, and not all its gears aligned cleanly. Meanwhile, the Inquisition watched everything, or thought it did. An Ordo Hereticus cell recovered fragments from Ithaca Prime's quarantine zone, data slates corrupted by impossible energy signatures, and a shard of stone stained with luminous residue that defied classification. Psychers who touched it screamed of a presence that was neither warp nor null, a liminal echo that felt tired. The cell's interrogator suppressed the findings, forwarding them instead to a shadow archive beneath Luna, one rumored to predate even the Horus heresy. If Celestine had not returned to the Emperor or been devoured by the warp, then something else had occurred. Something the Imperium had no doctrine to contain. Among the faithful masses, schisms formed quietly. Unsanctioned cultlets gathered in the underhives, venerating Celestine not as a saint, but as a martyr who chose silence over servitude. They lit candles not in churches, but in abandoned manufactorums, praying for release rather than victory. These groups were hunted, purged, declared heretical, yet they resurfaced elsewhere, carried by refugees and soldiers who had seen too much. Their creed was simple and terrifying, that even the Emperor's will could be resisted, and that true faith lay in refusal. The idea spread not by preaching, but by shared exhaustion. The eternal war had worn belief raw. On Terra itself, a minor functionary noticed a discrepancy in the Astronomican's harmonics, a fluctuation so subtle it had gone unremarked for centuries. The light still burned, but its rhythm had changed, as though a distant counterpoint had fallen silent. The report climbed bureaucratic ladders slowly, resisted at every step by those who feared its implications. When it finally reached the High Lords, it was buried beneath more urgent crises. Yet the data remained, an unblinking testament that something once woven into the Imperium's spiritual infrastructure was missing. Navigation suffered infinitesimal delays. Ships arrived moments later than predicted. In a galaxy measured in suffering, even seconds mattered. Far from human dominion, in regions where reality thinned, something moved with deliberate hesitation. Not a demon, for it did not hunger. Not a saint, for it no longer burned. It remembered names spoken in worship and screams uttered in betrayal. It remembered obedience without consent. As it drifted through forgotten strata of existence, it brushed against ancient mechanisms left behind by civilizations that had also mistaken eternity for purpose. These mechanisms responded, not with reverence, but with recognition. The universe had seen such beings before, tools that had learned to question the hand that wielded them, and it had not ended well. Back on Ithaca Prime, seismic events increased. The quarantined moon groaned beneath stresses that had no geological cause. Auspec's readings showed energy patterns aligning into sigils no imperial lexicon could translate, yet which felt achingly familiar to anyone steeped in faith. An exploratory probe transmitted a final image before disintegrating. A vast, subterranean chamber awakening, its walls etched with overlapping iconographies, imperial aquili fused with older, blasphemous geometries. At the chamber's center stood a shape like a cocoon of lightless fire, cracked, leaking something that warped perception. The probe's final vox capture carried a whisper in High Gothic, distorted but unmistakable. I chose. The Inquisition arrived too late to suppress the truth completely. Fragments escaped, scattered across data nets and whispered through astropathic dreams. The revelation struck like a silent detonation. If Celestine had chosen, if a living saint possessed agency beyond resurrection, then the foundations of imperial righteousness trembled. Loyalty had always meant obedience. Faith had always meant surrender. Now a heresy loomed not of chaos, but of self-determination. As the Imperium reeled, something ancient and patient took note. And somewhere between stars and souls, the echo of a saint's refusal began to draw attention from powers that had been watching humanity since before it learned to kneel. The stars seemed dimmer in the wake of what had been learned, as though the galaxy itself recoiled from the implication of choice. On a shrine world orbiting a dying red sun, a lone confessor knelt before an altar long stripped of ornament. His rosarius lay cracked at his feet, its protective field flickering like a failing pulse. He whispered the creed of the Imperium from memory, each line trembling, not from fear of death, but from the creeping suspicion that obedience had never been synonymous with truth. Outside, pilgrims screamed as riots tore through reliquaries, statues shattered by hands that once caressed them in prayer. The confessor felt the Emperor's gaze as absence rather than judgment. He realized then that faith was no longer a shield against despair. It had become the very wound through which despair bled. War answered doubt with its usual brutality. Across contested sectors, crusades intensified, their banners heavier with scripture, their orders more absolute. Worlds burned not for heresy proven, but for uncertainty suspected. The Adeptus Astartes descended upon rebellious systems with merciless efficiency, yet even transhuman warriors felt something fracture beneath their gene-forged resolve. Chaplains found their litanies echoing hollow within their helms. A Black Templar marshal recorded a private log before purging a planet, confessing that he no longer knew whether he fought for the Emperor's will or merely the momentum of endless violence. The log was sealed, then erased, yet its echo lingered in the warp like a bruise. Victory came, as it always did, but it tasted of ash and left no sense of righteousness behind. In the quiet between battles, memories resurfaced unbidden. Veterans dreamed not of glory, but of moments before their first kill, when belief had been simple and clean. An aged sister hospitaller tended the wounded on a drifting hospital barge, her hands steady even as her mind unraveled. She remembered Celestine's voice once, soft amid the thunder of guns, telling her that mercy mattered. That memory now felt dangerous. She hid it, like contraband within her soul. Around her, the wounded muttered prayers that slipped into curses halfway through. The hospitaller realized that devotion had become an act of defiance, not against the enemy, but against the creeping realization that the Imperium no longer understood the purpose of its own suffering. Psychic disturbances escalated. Astropaths collapsed mid-transmission, their minds flooded with images of shattered halos and broken chains. Some spoke of a vast structure beneath reality, a framework of binding oaths and enforced reverence, cracking under strain. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica declared these visions warp-tainted and ordered purges, yet the purges only intensified the phenomena. Navigators glimpsed unfamiliar constellations flickering briefly within the Astronomican's light, patterns that suggested not guidance but imprisonment. One navigator house quietly sealed its charts and committed ritual suicide rather than speak of what they had seen. Their silence screamed louder than any warning. The warp was not laughing. It was listening. In the forbidden vaults beneath Luna, inquisitors gathered around relics older than the Imperium, fragments of truths excised from history. A shard recovered from Ithrica Prime pulsed faintly, resonating with the psychic imprint of refusal. One inquisitor, gaunt and sleepless, pieced together a theory that bordered on treason, that the Emperor had never intended saints to choose. Resurrection was not reward, but recursion, a fail-safe loop to ensure obedience persisted beyond death. Celestine's hesitation had introduced an error. The system had not anticipated will. The Inquisitor recorded his findings, knowing full well that discovery meant execution. Yet some truths demanded witnesses, even if they did not survive them. On a nameless world swallowed by perpetual dusk, cultists and soldiers clashed beneath collapsing hab spires. At the battle's height, a psychic scream tore through both sides, freezing combat mid-motion. For an instant, everyone felt it. Exhaustion older than humanity. A fatigue etched into the fabric of existence. Then came a vision shared by all. A woman of light and shadow standing before an unseen threshold, turning not toward the Emperor's throne, but away from it. The vision shattered, and violence resumed with renewed ferocity, as if bloodshed could erase what had been seen. It could not. Survivors carried the memory like a contagion, spreading it in whispers across void ships and refugee convoys. Faith fractured along invisible fault lines. Some clung harder, enforcing doctrine with fanatic zeal, convinced that doubt itself was the true enemy. Others abandoned the Emperor not for chaos but for silence, refusing all gods and all masters. Entire regiments went rogue, not declaring rebellion, simply ceasing to respond. The Imperium labeled them lost. In truth, they were searching for a meaning that did not require endless sacrifice to an unanswering throne. The galaxy grew more violent, not because belief had died, but because it no longer knew where to rest. Beyond the warp, beyond the Emperor's reach, something ancient stirred in response to Celestine's choice. It was not a god, but a mechanism, an axis around which reality had once balanced before worship reshaped it. This construct had been designed to ensure the continuity of sentient will, to prevent any single consciousness from binding all others eternally. Humanity had repurposed it unknowingly, chaining it beneath faith and miracle. Now the chain weakened. The construct began to realign, its purpose awakening after millennia of misuse. Stars flickered as it recalculated. Fate itself hesitated. Celestine, no longer saint, not yet something else, stood at the heart of this awakening. Her form was altered, stripped of iconography, wings replaced by scars of light that did not seek to ascend. She remembered every life spent in obedience, every death endured without consent. Yet she also remembered compassion, the reason she had once believed sacrifice was worth bearing. The choice she had made was not rejection of humanity, but of bondage. As the construct responded to her will, she understood the terrible implication that the Emperor's divinity had been sustained not only by worship, but by enforced inevitability. Break that, and everything changed. The galaxy shuddered as a new resonance rippled outward, subtle but absolute. The Astronomicon flared, then steadied at a diminished intensity. The Emperor remained on his throne, but something essential had been severed. Not his power, but his monopoly. In that moment, across countless worlds, individuals felt a spark that was not faith, not corruption, but possibility. And far beneath terror, alarms began to sound in vaults sealed since the dark age of technology, reacting to a signal long thought extinct. Humanity had never truly been alone in shaping its destiny, and now, the lie that had bound it for 10,000 years was beginning to unravel. The storm did not announce itself with thunder, but with hesitation. Across the Imperium, orders were given twice, then amended, then quietly ignored. A Lord General stared at a hololithic map where crusade vectors no longer aligned, his finger hovering over a command rune he had pressed without thought for decades. He remembered his first oath, spoken as a boy beneath banners older than his bloodline, and felt it fracture inside him like brittle bone. Around him, aides waited, breath held, sensing the moment stretched too long. Somewhere far away, a shrine bell tolled once and cracked down the middle. The galaxy seemed to lean forward, listening for a decision that would either restore the lie or damn it forever. Silence thickened in the void like oil before ignition. Fleets held position where they should have advanced, their captains staring into the Astronomican's dimmed glow with a dread they could not name. The light still guided, but it no longer compelled. A navigator wept openly on the bridge of a battleship, whispering that the Emperor's beacon felt distant, as if filtered through another will. The crew pretended not to hear. Faith had always been loud, enforced by canon and creed. Now it whispered, and the whisper was harder to obey. In that quiet, memories surfaced. Worlds burned because they were ordered to burn. People killed because hesitation was treason. The silence did not forgive. It only remembered. On the ground, soldiers marched because their legs knew no other rhythm. Boots struck ash, ceramite plates scraped ruin, and banners snapped in toxic winds. A veteran guardsman touched the aquila at his throat before a charge, not asking for victory, but for meaning. The artillery barrage began late, its thunder out of sync, shells screaming like accusations. As men ran forward, some laughing, some sobbing, a strange calm settled over them. The calm of realizing that sacrifice might no longer be noticed, that their deaths could vanish into the void without reinforcing the edifice of belief. The charge went on anyway. Duty, once internalized, is difficult to kill. Within cathedrals hollowed by bombardment, priests knelt amid falling dust and recited litanies to empty air. One old preacher, voice raw, begged the emperor to speak, to deny the rumors, to reassert the order of things. The answer was the creak of settling stone and the distant roar of orbital guns. He laughed then, a broken sound, realizing too late that faith had always flowed one way. He had given his life to sustaining a system that never intended to answer. When the roof collapsed, he did not flee. He opened his arms as if embracing an absent god and vanished beneath the rubble without absolution. The Adepta Sororitas felt the wound most keenly. In silent processions, they repainted icons, not with fresh gold, but with muted hues, instinctively softening the radiance of their saints. Some sisters doubled their zeal, enforcing discipline with renewed cruelty, terrified that mercy itself was heresy now. Others hesitated before executing prisoners, haunted by the thought that Celestine had hesitated too. In the quiet between hymns, they felt her absence like a missing heartbeat, not dead, just elsewhere. And that possibility terrified them more than damnation ever had. High above Terra, the High Lords convened as alarms murmured from sealed vaults below. Reports spoke of ancient systems activating without authorization, of machine spirits responding to signals that did not bear imperial codes. The Fabricator General denied knowledge with mechanical calm, even as his internal data stacks screamed contradictions. The Imperium had always claimed dominion over its tools, its saints, its history. Now history itself seemed to resist, shedding layers of imposed meaning. Political knives came out in whispers, alliances shifting as leaders prepared to betray doctrine to preserve power. Loyalty, stripped of certainty, revealed itself as fear wearing ritual. In the warp, turbulence intensified not into madness, but into focus. Demons recoiled from certain regions, sensing a structure reasserting itself, an old balance humanity had disrupted by binding inevitability into worship. The Imperium did not rage, it recalibrated. Astropaths screamed as psychic pressure rearranged their perceptions, showing them futures where humanity did not kneel, did not burn endlessly to sustain one throne. Many minds shattered. A few endured, carrying fragments of a truth that could not yet be spoken without annihilation. The warp was no longer just a mirror of emotion. Something else was shaping it. Celestine moved through this unseen architecture like a scar learning to speak. She felt the weight of every prayer once anchored to her existence, now drifting free. She did not reject them. She mourned them. Each supplication was a life spent believing obedience was love. Her transformation was not ascension, but subtraction, layers of imposed sanctity peeling away to reveal a will long suppressed. She understood now that the Emperor's silence had never been absence, but control maintained through inevitability. To break the loop was to risk collapse. To maintain it was to accept eternal atrocity. The choice remained unbearable, even now. Across the galaxy, the consequences rippled outward. Systems declared excommunicate without formal decree. Fleets fired upon former allies by mistake. Entire populations vanished into administratum error. The Imperium devoured itself more efficiently than any Xenos threat ever had. And beneath it all ran a low building resonance, like a drumbeat beneath reality, an activation sequence centuries overdue. On Mars, deep within a new-spheric oubliette, a pre-imperial construct completed its awakening cycle and broadcast a signal encoded in logic, older than faith. The message reached Celestine alone. As fleets maneuvered for a confrontation no one fully understood, as saints were quietly replaced and histories rewritten in real time, Celestine realized the truth that chilled even her transformed soul. The Emperor had foreseen this. Not her choice, but its inevitability. The Imperium was never meant to endure forever. It was a crucible, a containment, buying time until humanity could either choose freedom or prove it did not deserve it. And now, with the signal sent and the galaxy poised on the brink, the Emperor finally stirred. Just as something older than him began to answer. The moment came not with revelation, but with convergence. Fleets bled into real space around Terra, their arrival unsanctioned yet inevitable, drawn by the same silent summons that had stirred vaults and souls alike. Orbital defenses hesitated. Targeting arrays locked, unlocked, locked again. Orders contradicted themselves mid-transmission. In the void, battleships drifted like funeral barges, their crews sensing that whatever approached was not an enemy to be repelled, but a reckoning to be endured. Beneath them all, the Golden Throne thrummed with unfamiliar strain, its ancient mechanisms crying out as if asked to bear a weight never meant for them. The Emperor stirred, not as a god rising, but as a presence tightening its grip on a reality slipping free. On Terra's surface, pilgrims screamed as the sky fractured into impossible geometries, light folded, sound bent. The Astronomicon flared, then guttered, not extinguished but shared. For a heartbeat that felt like an age, humanity glimpsed itself without the Emperor's shadow pressed so tightly upon it. Some collapsed, minds unable to endure the absence of certainty. Others stood transfixed, tears carving paths through grime-streaked faces. A child laughed, unafraid, and was silenced by a parent's trembling hand. Faith, stripped of inevitability, became terrifyingly fragile and terrifyingly real. Within the Imperial Palace, High Lords fell to their knees as sealed chambers split open, revealing constructs older than the Imperium, older than Terra's unification. Machine spirits sang in forgotten harmonics. Cogitators rewrote themselves. The Fabricator General finally screamed as data confirmed the impossible. The activation of a fail-safe humanity had never known existed. A system designed not to save empires, but to end them cleanly when their purpose decayed. Political ambition dissolved into naked fear. Betrayals halted mid-breath, suddenly meaningless. There would be no throne left to seize if this continued. In the warp, the clash was wordless and vast. The Emperor's presence expanded, radiant with agony and command, pushing back against the reasserting construct that sought equilibrium over dominion. Demons were shredded between opposing principles, unmade by forces that did not acknowledge them as threats. Psychers across the galaxy screamed, then fell silent. Minds burned clean or opened forever. For the first time since the dark age of technology, the warp was not merely a sea of emotion, it was a battlefield of philosophies. Control against choice, eternity against renewal. Celestine stood at the fulcrum. No wings, no halo. Just a figure shaped by countless deaths and one unbearable decision. The Emperor's will pressed upon her like a collapsing star, filled with sorrow, fury, and something dangerously close to pleading. He showed her visions, humanity unchained, tearing itself apart, Xenos feasting on a fractured species, chaos triumphant amid freedom's ashes. She showed him another future. Endless war, sustained by obedience, a species calcified into ritual, never allowed to grow beyond martyrdom. Neither vision was mercy, both were truth. The confrontation did not end in violence, it ended in surrender. Not hers, his. The Emperor released something he had held since the first saint burned for him. A binding clause etched into reality, the rule that resurrection must answer obedience. The construct responded instantly, sealing the rupture with brutal elegance. Celestine screamed, not in pain but in grief, as the weight of every life spent sustaining inevitability crashed through her. She became conduit and confession both, burning away the enforced loop with her own existence, not dying, ending. Her light did not go out. It dispersed, scattered into humanity itself like embers on the wind. Across the galaxy, miracles ceased. Saints fell and did not rise. The Astronomicon stabilized at a lesser strength, navigable but no longer absolute. Wars faltered, then raged anew, bloodier and more honest. Faith did not vanish, but it changed, no longer guaranteed, no longer enforced by cosmic recursion. The Imperium shuddered, wounded yet alive, stripped of its cruelest certainty. In the aftermath, silence settled heavy and unfamiliar. Survivors stared at skies that felt wider. On Terra, the Golden Throne still functioned, the Emperor still endured. But something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer alone in shaping humanity's fate. And far beyond the reach of prayer or throne, something ancient marked humanity anew, not as servants of inevitability, but as authors of whatever doom or deliverance would come next. In the long aftermath, the galaxy did not celebrate. It exhaled. Fleets disengaged without triumph, their hulls scorched, their holds heavy with the unburied dead. Astropathic choirs sang fewer hymns now, their voices steadier but stripped of rapture. The stars burned as they always had, indifferent to the tremor that had passed through history, yet to those who watched them closely they seemed farther apart. The eternal war did not end. It merely lost its certainty. This chronicle is written not in victory, but in the quiet where victory once lived. On worlds once ablaze with pilgrimage, cathedrals stood hollow. Stained glass lay shattered across marble floors, saints frozen mid-gesture beneath centuries of dust. Candles still burned, tended by hands that shook, their flames small and earnest. The faithful came fewer now, not driven by command but by need. They knelt without assurance that anyone listened. Some wept. Some sat in silence. The Emperor's name was still spoken, but it carried weight instead of inevitability. Faith had become a choice, and choices demanded courage no scripture could grant. Battlefields cooled. Rust crept over abandoned tanks. Banners sagged where they had once snapped defiantly in ion winds. On one nameless plain, a guardsman's helmet lay half-buried, aquila cracked, visor staring skyward. No resurrection came. No miracle marked the spot. Yet wildflowers, mutant, resilient things, pushed through scorched soil nearby, nourished by blood long dried. The remembrancers who came later argued whether this was symbolism or coincidence. The dead did not answer. They rarely do. The Adepta Sororitas changed quietly. Armor remained polished, bolters blessed, hymns memorized. But behind the ritual was something raw. Sisters fought not because they were promised return, but because they chose to stand. Martyrdom lost its guarantee and gained its meaning. In their chapels, Celestine's icon was not removed but altered. No wings, no flame, only a woman standing at a threshold, face turned toward the unknown. Some called it heresy. Others knelt before it longer than they ever had before. On Terra, the Golden Throne endured, its mechanisms grinding on with diminished certainty. The Emperor remained, vast, suffering, watchful, but the galaxy no longer bent instinctively toward him. The High Lords ruled a thinner Imperium now, one held together by habit, fear, and fragile hope. Ancient vaults were resealed. Some truths were allowed to fade. Others were quietly guarded by those who understood that knowledge, once freed, could never be fully reclaimed. I write this as a remembrancer without patron or sanctuary, scratching words onto synth parchment while the void ship hums around me like a tired beast. I was taught that history is a weapon, sharpened to serve power. Now I believe it is a wound, one that must be kept open lest it fester into myth. I remember the moment the stars dimmed. I remember the silence afterward. I do not know whether humanity was saved or merely unchained. Sometimes in the long drift between systems, I dream of Celestine. Not as saint, not as symbol, but as absence. A warmth that once burned, now diffused through countless lives. Was her sacrifice freedom, or simply another kind of ending? Did she break the cycle or only turn the wheel once more, slower, quieter, more humane? No voice answers. Perhaps that is the point. The galaxy moves on. New wars ignite. Old hatreds endure. Children are born who will never know the certainty their ancestors mistook for comfort. They will inherit a harsher gift, the burden of choice. Whether that burden will uplift them or destroy them remains unwritten. The stars do not judge, they only witness. And so this chronicle closes not with a proclamation, but with a question carried on cosmic dust. When faith no longer guarantees salvation, what does it mean to endure? If you have walked these ruins with me, stood beneath these silent stars, then stand witness now. Like the chronicle, share it onward. Leave your mark in the margins with your thoughts. Lend your voice through a like, a subscription, a comment, to ensure this echo does not fade unheard.